Hi everyone, Yako here. I just got home yesterday from the Galactic Championships where I top 8'd, and I thought it would be a good time to make a video. Uh, Actually, I'm going to make two videos, one for the tournament report, but this video that I'm making right now is going to detail why I chose to play Vader4 Yellow and the evolution that the deck went through on the way to the Galactic Championships. So, for those that don't know, we were supposed to have the full spoiler roughly 3 weeks before the Galactic Championship started. Instead, because of issues, we got the full spoiler 7 weeks before the Galactic Championship started. So we knew going into it that the meta would be somewhat established. We'd have a decent idea of what the top decks would be. Of course, there's always room for surprises, as we saw with the Kylo 5 Tarkentown deck from the Both Network. That deck was awesome. I'm looking forward to trying it out in the coming days. But for now, let's begin. So once the complete spoiler of the cards came out, being a Sabine player, um, I didn't think Sabine was going to be really viable anymore. I always thought one of the strengths of Sabine was that the units that she played on the curve two resource from 2 resources up to 6 resources were great because they were really well statted. Like Battlefield Marine as a 3/3, Cassian as a 3/5, 4 drop K2SO as a 4/4 wasn't so great, but you had Darksaber, you could play General's Blade and do something else with the 1 resource. Even playing like a 3/5 on the 3 resource turn wasn't so bad. You had Wing Leader to make Sabine really good. And then once you got to 5 resources, you had Poe, which was arguably the best 5 drop in the game, especially with ECL. And then for 6 resources, you had Wrecker, which was a 7/6 that removed the unit from the ground. So I always felt that was Sabine's strength, where like she was an aggressive deck, but her units were stronger. She could control the board, especially with the help of ECL and all that. And I felt that sort of went away uh, with the coming of the new 2/4 drops being prevalent, and like all the colors now pretty much have a 3/5. So Sabine was losing her edge um, stat wise for the early drops, and Chirrut wasn't going to do it any favors, and neither was the new Vader. So the first deck that I tried once the full spoiler was out was Obi-Wan Blue, and that's because I felt that with the new units that the Force deck got, so like Grogu, sorry, not Grogu, Gungi, Yaddle, Secretive Sage, with those units, um, those units just had better stats than the units that Sabine could field, and not only that, but Obi-Wan could give them XP like really easily, and that just made them bigger than all the other units in the game. So I decided to try Obi-Wan first. The list was fairly standard, and I won't put it up here because I'm sure most of you that are here because you want to discuss Vader4 Yellow and not Obi-Wan Blue. But the list was fairly straightforward. There wasn't very many events. I'm a big fan of upgrades, so the original lists had 3 Jedi's lightsaber, 3 Generals blade, and the deck was just about putting well-statted units at every point of the curve and just making them even better with Obi-Wan. And the deck had some issues, namely the new Vader. It also had a hard time dealing with the space decks. So I tested that for I think 2 weeks, and it became really obvious to me that space was the way to go because all the new force decks were all playing ground. Uh, so I really wanted to get up there in space. Now, usually we would have had 3 weeks to get ready for the Galactic Championships if the set hadn't been spoiled early. So Vader would have been in a great position because I don't think after 2 weeks of testing, most people were done testing the new stuff. I think the meta would have been completely different, and I think Vader4 Yellow would have been positioned very, very well. So from that point on, I started testing Vader4 Yellow, and I began with the list that the both the network used to do really well at one of the regionals. I forget which one, but it's the one where Yoda Killer finished ninth. There was a small difference between the list that Yoda Killer ran and the list that Ian Klein Lego Pizza ran. Um, and I preferred the Yoda Killer list because they had the Lurking Tides main deck, and all the Force decks were running like Force Throw as removal, and some of them were running Shatterpoint and things like that. And Lurking Tide Phantom was immune to all the removal. Uh, so that's the list that I started with as my starting point. The list was performing very well, especially for like the first 2 weeks that I played it. So weeks, let's say 3 and 4 of testing. I didn't change anything. I just ran the list as is for a long time. I wanted to get a feel for the list and see what I didn't like. Uh, and then eventually, sometime after a week or two, I changed it um, to this version 2. So the main difference is the ships, the one-drop ships were still the same. I added a third No Good to Me Dead. Um, I added the Tie Dagger Vanguard's main deck. And what did I take out? That's a good question. So I added 3 cards. I took out the 7 Fleet Defenders. No, they weren't in the deck. I'm not sure what I took out. So I added these 3 cards. I moved one Whaley to the side. Oh yeah, the Lurking Ties. All right. So basically, basically I gave uh, Lego Pizza's list a try, I think is what I did. I tried it for a few games, and I really quickly went back to having the Lurking Ties main deck because I just felt that they were really good. There was a lot of matchups like against blue-green control, um, actually against most of the fields where if you put Vader on a Lurking Tie, they just couldn't deal with it. Um, so that's why I wanted the Lurking Tie main deck. Right. All right. So very quickly, I played this version less than a day, I think, and I switched to this version where the Lurking Ties are back in. Uh, actually, it might, yeah, the sideboard looks a bit different. Not even. I just went straight back to the Yoda Killer version, I think. Oh, except now I have the 7th Fleet Defenders main deck. I think that was a change. I took out the P38s. Right. All right. So that was the change for this version. I took out the P38s and I put in the 7th Fleet Defenders. Um, at that point in time, I think people were starting to run Bombing Run in their sideboards. Some adventurous souls even decided that running it main deck was the way to go. Um, so I had the 7th Fleet Defender as a ship that could survive Bombing Run. Uh, and I took out the P38s because the P38s weren't really defeating any units anymore. P38 was really useful when Han 1 Green was a thing and when Sabine was a thing because it could it could finish off ships, it could defeat the Falcon on its own, things like that. But since everyone was running Force Throw, Han 1 Green wasn't really playable anymore, and Sabine was a lot less popular, and you could see it like in the discords where Sabine used to be one of the most popular decks discussed, and like people were just leaving the threads. Very few people were there, and the people that were there were diehard Sabine players that didn't feel like they had another option. Like they were there, but didn't really want to be there. Um, so yeah, so that's why I did these changes. So I played that version for a bit, and I just felt uh, let's see what the next version is before I say anything to see what the changes are. This version, the sideboard changed. Yeah, the sideboard changed. The tie dagger vanguards were back in the sideboard. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So I played this version, but like something. Played version 3. Version 3 felt pretty good, but felt like a little something was missing. Hantu Blue was like sort of a race. I wanted to have like more cards against that matchup because by this point it was fairly obvious, I'd say, that it was going to be the most played deck. So I tried putting the Tide Dagger Vanguards back in the side. Uh, I didn't really like the Tide Dagger Vanguards because when you think about it, um, if everyone's going ground and you're going space, their units are just never going to have any damage on them. And so the only way you're going to get damage on their ground units is Han 2 damaging his own units to play them early. And when you look at Han 2's units, the only unit that has 4 HP that Han 2 will ramp into is Kiali Mundi. So your Tie Dagger Vanguard is not defeating anything, and I think if Han2 is playing Kiali Mundi on 3R, you're somewhat happy. Somewhat happy. Uh, so yeah, so I didn't see much points in having the Tie Dagger Vanguards in the deck at all. So I'll go to the next version of the deck where I'm pretty sure. Oh no, they're still there, but we made some other chances. Eventually, the Tie Dagger Vanguards will go. So I put the Elite P-38s back in the main. I took out the Eager Escort Fighters. So the escort, the Eager Escort Fighters were really good at the beginning of testing. So maybe like the first 4 or 5 weeks, because blue decks still hadn't caught on that playing Concord Dawn was a trap. So the deck as built by Yoda Killer and Lego Pizza and all the other people who worked on it before was really resilient to Sentinels and ships in space, especially when they cost less than 4. Basically, playing a ship that costs 3 or less against this deck was just a waste of time. Like it wasn't gonna do anything. Best case scenario, it was gonna get Eager Escort Fightered, and like worst case, it was gonna get Geonosis or Sanctioner Shuttle, and it's just a huge tempo loss, and it's really hard to come back from. Like I would seriously have games sometimes where I would play against blue decks, and they would play Concord Dawn on 3 resources, it'd get bounced. They'd play it again on 4 resources, it'd get bounced. They'd play it again on 5 resources, it'd get captured, and then the game would be over, and they hadn't done anything. All they had done was try to play that one Sentinel, right? So it's same thing with the 3/3. Villainy Sentinel. I think the Supremacy tie, 3/3 for 3. Those units suffer from the same thing where they're not even they don't even buy you time. They just waste your turn. So I think people had started to catch on by then, and since no one was playing um, Sabine anymore, really, I felt comfortable putting the eager escort fighters in the side. And the reason I brought back the P-38 Starfighters is they just had 1 extra HP, so they survived against Talzin. They survived against Talzin's -1/-1. They could soak up some damage against Cad Bane and Quinlan without dying. Basically, I just wanted a unit that had more than 1 HP, which is what the Eager Escort Fighter wasn't. Um, so this list still hasn't changed much. Oh, actually, a big change in this version. Uh, Overwhelming Barrage is gone. Outmaneuver is in. I'm pretty sure I didn't look at all the Vader lists honestly. From Galactic Championship, I remember around this time in the K2D Discord, people were talking about putting Outmaneuver main deck in Vader4 Yellow, and it had been something that had crossed my mind, and I decided to try it. Um, I let myself be convinced by the other people discussing it. Uh, and I decided to try it just to see how it was. I really never liked Overwhelming Barrage. I understand why, um, Yoda Killer and both the network and all those guys played it in set 4, and I didn't feel like those reasons were really valid anymore. Mostly because of all the new units just having a ton of HP or having shields. Overwhelming Barrage wasn't really defeating anything. Like you'd be in a race situation sometimes, and like you would overwhelming Barrage and you'd defeat 1 unit, and it would take your whole turn because you weren't gonna do anything else with the 1 resource that was left over on 6R or like you did on 5R, you just had nothing left to do. Uh, and Overwhelming Barrage wasn't great unless you did it on Clone Combat Squadron, and if you did, you maybe defeated 2 units, but you also gave your opponent an action to defeat your Clone Combat Squadron before it could hit. So you'd also lose damage sometimes. And I just didn't feel it was worth it anymore. It felt like a win more card, and like when it was good, it was great. It was great in the mirror, but not that many people were playing Vader4 Yellow this time because this is about maybe 2 weeks, a week and a half before the Galactic Championships, and like bombing run was everywhere now. Everyone was running 3 bombing runs in the sideboard at least. Some people were running the main deck, and it was just a horrible, horrible time to be playing Vader4 Yellow. Um, so I tried these changes. Outmaneuver helped a ton in race situations, which is what if the Han 2 blue player knew how to play the matchup well, it was a race situation. And if they started the frog, you really needed to get the frog off of the table, or else you weren't going to win the race. And Poe was hard to deal with. Like they had a lot of cards that were hard to deal with, and outmaneuver problem pretty much like solved all the problems. You could play outmaneuver on 6 resources and play a unit. So if Vader stuck, you could do like a ton of damage on your first action, and usually if you outmaneuvered them at the beginning of 6R, they wouldn't be able to defeat you with their first action on 7R, so you got to hit a second time with Vader. And so yeah, that was pretty much the rationale for that. And it was really useful during the Galactic Championship. Like I said, I think I'm the only Vader to have made the switch from Overwhelming Barrage to Outmaneuver, and I never regretted it once. Like never once did I have a game where I thought, oh wow, I really wish I could have drawn Overwhelming Barrage here. Luckily enough, as well, I never had to play the mirror because without Overwhelming Barrage, I don't think the mirror is really winnable. Maybe I got lucky once on online and I managed to beat someone somehow, even though they played a barrage and I didn't. But I think I just like outdrew them in terms of clone combat squadrons and stolen AT haulers. So I just got lucky. I just don't think the mirror is winnable. And it's important to note that because we're running out maneuver now instead of overwhelming barrage, our matchup against other space decks is now a lot worse than it used to be. So I was gambling on the fact that people just wouldn't play space. I thought space was like really good. I expected Vader to be the most played space deck at around 5% of the metagame for the Galactic Championships, and I really went all in on that guess when I decided to play Outmaneuver instead of Overwhelming Barrage. Uh, so I tried this out for a bit, and a few days, maybe 1 week before the Galactic Championship, maybe 1 week, maybe less than 1 week, I changed to this version. So in this version, the 7th Fleet Defenders are back in the sideboard. The Eager Escort Fighter is back in the main deck. And I have Simtars in the main deck. Alright, so important to note, I was never going to play this version at the Galactic Championships as is. I wanted to test how Simtar was against Bombing Run in general. And I just wanted to make sure I drew it a lot of the time, even into the people that ran Bombing Run main deck, just to see how it did against Bombing Run. It was clear to me that the Simtars were going to end up in the sideboard instead of the 7th Fleet Defenders. So that was always clear. Um, and then the other big change is that the Eager Escort Fighters are back in the main deck, and for the simpler reason that Han 2 Blue was going to be a race situation, and the Eager Escort Fighter had an extra power over the 7th Fleet Defender, and they were both as difficult to kill for Han 2 as the other one, right? Like Hantu had a hard time dealing with the units. They had to play like, Shatterpoint or Fell the Dragon. Whichever of the two that they played was going to defeat either one. The shield didn't matter. And if they had Shatterpoint or Fell the Dragon, they had better uses for those cards anyways than defeating an eager escort fighter or a 7th fleet defender. Seriously, like if my opponent used 4 resources to defeat either one of those instead of the Victor leader or the Clone Combat Squadron that I was gonna play like on that turn, that was a win. So that's the reason behind the switch. Another thing that I wanted to know with the switch is that on paper, Grogu seems like an amazing unit to start on the board for Han 2 Blue. And occasionally, very rarely, but occasionally, it does run away with the game when it defeats your units. But for the most part, the matchup is a race. And if you start Grogu instead of starting the Frog, that's 20 less damage by the time 6R comes around, right? Because the Frog will do 5 damage on 3R, 5 damage on 4R, 5 damage on 5R, and probably 6 damage on probably 5 damage on 6R because you're gonna need 1 or 2 actions to finish the game. So Grogu defeats your units, but that's also 20 less damage from Han 2 Blue over the course of the game. So you can win through Grogu a lot easier than you can win through the Frog, right? Because both of them, you need the same answers for both of them, right? You need to get the Sanctuary Shuttle online and capture one, or you gotta bounce it, you gotta do something. And so they get dealt with by the same answers, except the Frog puts a lot of pressure on you when you don't have an answer, whereas Grogu gives you time to deal with him, and sometimes you can even win without dealing with him. So I was always happier when my opponent started Grogu over the Frog. In a perfect world, they would start with neither. They would start with like Cassian or like the Secret of Sage, but but most people prioritized Grogu over the Frog, and I feel like that was a mistake. So this was the list that I played with, um, all the way up to the Galactic Championships, knowing that I was going to change my list, uh, before the deadline. So I submitted my list, I think, on I want to say Thursday morning, maybe Thursday around 1 local time. And then between I think 7:53 and 7:58, I submitted roughly 3 or 4 lists. I would have to look at my email to see all those changes, but we're not gonna go through all 3 or 4 lists. I'm just gonna skip right to the list that I actually played at the Galactic Championships. So this was the list that I played. Um, there's a few key changes. Um, I took out the pilots um, to put in 2 more 1-drops because I did not want to play a ship, play the pilot, and then get force throwed and not be able to make a token. So we took out the pilots. I put in a 3rd droid starfighter. I put in 1 forged starfighter because I felt he was the 6th best 1-drop. Uh, I'm not even sure. I think I played it once or twice. It was just a 16th 1-drop, and it got resource most of the time. Uh, yeah, that's pretty much all there is to say about that. The 7 fleet defenders were back in the main deck, and the scimitars went in the sideboard. I got rid of the tie dagger vanguards because, like I said before, the 2 damage was hardly ever relevant. It might have been relevant if there were more space decks, but I was really gambling on the fact that people just wouldn't have the guts to play the space decks because they didn't want to run into bombing run all weekend. Uh, and then so I wanted to play 3 Waylay, 3 No Good to Me Dead, and here we can't see, but there's only 2 Jonas's patrol fighters. That was the last minute change. I took one out. I put in the 1 stolen AT hauler. Uh, I regret that. That should have been a third Jonas's patrol fighter. That was the last change I think I made to the list at 7:58, and by 9 o'clock I was kicking myself. It should have just been Jonas's patrol fighter. So this list had a lot of changes. I'm gonna go over the changes, I guess. I already went over the pilot change. I wanted to have three No Get to Me Dead, three Waylay, and three Jonas's patrol fighter, even though I only played two. Uh, because the matchups were going to be races, you needed to bounce the three drops, and especially well against Han 2 Blue, usually you only had one unit to bounce because they would play like a three drop on turn one, and then they would play a four drop, and there was nothing else to bounce with or capture with the shuttle and Jonas's. But just bouncing their one unit still made a big difference in the race. And against the other decks, where if you bounce their two drop and you bounce their three drop, the game is in like you're really in really good shape to win. So I wanted to do that as often as possible. Um, the big change in this version, well, the Seventh Fleet Defenders are back main deck because they survive bombing run all the time. They're good against Grogu pings. They have 2 HP instead of 1, so they don't die to the Talzin -1/-1. And then the big change is the stolen AT haulers. Two of them going to the sideboard. Um, so Bone Network was right. In set 4, Stolen AT Hauler was like an amazing ship. It was great with Overwhelming Barrage. It was great if your opponent tried to steal it, because they always needed to use more resources to steal it from you than you had to use to steal it back. In fact, it was just so bad that after a while people caught on and they would just stop playing the Stolen AT Hauler, um, which was great, because then you didn't even have to worry about having the resources to take it back. Uh, the problem is that all of that doesn't apply to decks that are running Force Throw, which is the majority of decks, right? You place the only T Hauler, opponent plays one resource, discards a card, they steal it. Um, so really, they didn't really discard a card. They like paid one unit to defeat your 4/5 and get a 4/5 of their own, which is amazing. And because of that, I was going to have to spend more resources than my opponent did to get the stolen AT Hauler back, which is why I moved to the sideboard. Right, I was fine bringing them in against decks that didn't have Force Throw, uh, but against the Force Throw decks, I never really wanted to play it. Maybe you could get away with playing it on 5R, because then on 6R, if they defeat it and they play it, it won't matter because most of the games end on 6R. So it's okay on 5R, but usually on 5R is when you're playing Clone Combat Squadron, or Victor Leader, or sometimes you're even paying 5 for Jonas's Patrol Fighter. Like you have better things to do on 5R, like Waylay and No Get to Me Dead, or Outmaneuver and No Get to Me Dead. Maybe not Outmaneuver and No Get to Me Dead, but like a unit and No Get to Me Dead. So yeah, so it was never great. And like the only time I felt it was playable was on 5R against the Force Throws, which was the majority of the field. So going back, if I had to do it again, I'd take out the Stolen T Haulers. I'd put in the third Jonas's patrol fighter instead. Um, and then for the sideboard, I'd probably even take them out of the sideboard. They just weren't really that useful uh, during the weekend. When I did put them in, though, usually if it was a deck against a deck that had um, Sentinels in space, I would take out two 7th Fleet Defenders to put the Stolen T Hauler in. And if it wasn't, if it was against a deck that did have the Sentinels, or that didn't have the Sentinels, I'd take out the Eager Escort Fighters. Another thing that made them much worse too is that in set 4, Blue Green Villainy did not play Takedown. They mostly played No Glory, uh, only results as their main removal, and they couldn't use that on the Stolen T Hauler because you just get it back. But in the set 5 meta, um, blue-green villainy was running takedown. Decks also had access to Shatterpoint. Uh, but again, the decks that usually ran Shatterpoint ran Force Throw, so that wasn't a big a deal. But the Stolen AT Hauler just was a lot easier to deal with in general than it was in set 4, and I didn't want to deal with that. Um, I did not explain the Scimitar's before in the previous version when they were main deck. So the idea behind Scimitar, um, and also the lack of Bazines and Tip the Scale. Uh, so the big downside to playing this deck is that you know that games 2 and 3 against a large portion of the metagame, you're going to be running into Bombing Run. And the common way for Vader4 Yellow to deal with Bombing Run was to play Bazine or Tip the Scale. I didn't like Bazine because she would leave a body on the ground, opening us up to the ECL of Vader. Um, and I didn't like Tip the Scale. Uh, well, I didn't like Bazine and Tip the Scale because sure you could get the card out of their hand, but they can always top deck it, and so neither of these are like fail-proof um, answers to Bombing Run, right? It's like Thoughtseize in Magic. You can take the card out of your opponent's hand. You can't stop them from drawing it. Um, so I felt the other downside to both of those is that they cost 2 resources, and you very rarely have initiative on five resources. So if you wanted to play them to get Bombing Run out of your opponent's hand, you either had to claim early, or you had to play them for 2 resources on the 4 resource turn, which meant that you weren't really doing anything else with your turn. You were either playing a 1 drop or uh, doing nothing else. So essentially, that meant that even though the printed cost on the card was 2, they really cost 3 or 4. And I didn't want to waste my 4 resource turn not advancing the board. So once I decided that I wasn't going to play either Bazine or Tip the Scale, uh, the next thing was to figure out how to deal with Bombing Run another way. And the way that I decided to deal with it was to play a lot of units that wouldn't die to Bombing Run, right? Because if I could have on the board 1 unit that wasn't going to die to Bombing Run, then Clone Combat Squadron also wasn't going to die to Bombing Run. So that was another reason for having the Lurking TIE Fighter main deck. That was the main reason for having the 7th Fleet Defender main deck. That was the reason why I had the 3rd shuttle in the sideboard, because the shuttle essentially saves 2 units. Uh, it survives the bombing run, and it gives its shield to another unit to make them survive the bombing run. Um, and so a lot of the decisions that I made with the sideboard and even with the main deck uh, was based on surviving bombing run. I decided my opponent is allowed to play 1 bombing run, and I should still win. And if they want to really counter my deck, they're gonna have to play 2 bombing runs, right? Um, so yeah, so that's the explanation behind all this, and it worked great. Uh, you had Scimitar on the table, your opponent bombing runs, Scimitar hits them for 6, and now if they take another action, you can just like claim right away and hit them for 6 again if they're close to dying, and if not, you still have your other actions as long as you claim before them. And generally, for the Han matchup, especially if they took 5R to bombing run you, you would either have less actions than them, or it was very obvious when they were going to claim, so you could always make sure to claim before them, right? Like they would attack with their units, they would deploy Han, then they would attack with Han. So when they deployed Han, you could claim and make sure you had the first action. I had one game against Han where the game was like somewhat close. My opponent was at uh, 12 damage on their base. 12? 10 damage on their base. 10 damage. No, 12 damage on their base. They bombing run. I had Victor Squadron Leader on the table, and I had Simtar. So they were at 12 damage. They bombing run. Victor hit for 2, Simtar hit for 7. They were at 21, and they had to claim to because if they had another action, I claimed and I would finish them off with Simtar. So they had to claim and they had to like draw their they had to either draw their second bombing run or have one in their hand. And they were only running 2 bombing runs in their sideboard, but that game my opponent did have it, but it still put a lot of pressure on him to have that bombing run or else lose the game through the first bombing run. And that's something that might not have always been obvious to all my opponents. Like it never came up, but you know, I think most people, if they were playing against Vader4 Yellow, they drew 2 bombing runs. They might feel confident enough that they would resource the second one, and then this version of the deck could punish them for it. Um, so, like I said, I won't go too much in depth about the games. I'll have a separate video for my matchups and stuff. But I was very happy with the way the list ran. I'm pretty sure this was the right way to play it, minus the Stolen AT Hauler for the third Geonosis Patrol Fighter. Sorry, another reason why the Geonosis Patrol Fighter was good is in the matchups where you knew you were going to get bombing run, you usually had to tokens on the table at the end of the 4 resource turn, and you usually had a free resource because you played something that costs 3. And so with that free resource, you could exploit the 2 tokens and play the Geonosis Patrol Fighter and bounce something that your opponent played. So even though you lost the Geonosis Patrol Fighter to the bombing run, you still took a unit off the board. And that's another one of the big reasons why that should have been a 3 of. Because it was just better against bombing run than Stolen to Hauler. And that was one of the reasons. So yeah, if I had to redo the list again, I'd take out the Stolen AT Hauler. I'd put in the third Geonosis Patrol Fighter. Probably take out the Stolen AT Haulers from the sideboard. Uh, I'm not sure what I would put in. I gave it some thought, but not that much. There's just nothing great. Um, I lost to Quinlan, Talzin, and the Kylo 5 Tarkin Town deck during the weekend, and I'm not sure there's a card that I could put in that would like help a ton against those matchups. Maybe I could put in like the third Eager Escort Fighter uh, for Quinlan. Uh, I'm really not sure. I don't think all my games against the Kylo deck went finished before Kylo uh, came came on the board. So restock in uh, aggrieved the aggrieved guy uh, wouldn't have changed anything. Migs was a hard card to deal with, especially without initiative. Uh, but I'm not even sure what the deck could play to do something about that. Um, so yeah, and I don't think Talzin is the best bombing run deck, but the version that won Galactics didn't have bombing run. They felt like they didn't need it to beat Vader4 Yellow. I I obviously disagree, but at the same time, I lost 2-0 to Beton, so who am I to, who am I to disagree with their assessment? Um, so that about wraps it up. If you have any questions or comments or whatever, feel free to reach out either in the comments or you can message me directly. I really enjoy discussing decks and card choices. Like I really like playing the game, but I really enjoy the theory of the decks and card choices more than I like playing, I'd say. So yeah, I'm always open to discuss these things, and it doesn't even have to be about Vader4 Yellow. It could be about other decks. I used to play a ton of Sabine, and I play a lot of aggro decks and whatever card games I've played. So thanks a lot for watching, and I hope you had a good time.